for him to try and heal those wounds. Let us go forward with a stronger union as we face the negotiations, as we fight for the best possible outcome for the British people, and let's do that with respect for one another.
Tommy Sheppard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. First of all, can I congratulate the Government on being so efficient at managing its legislative programme that it has been able to find a full day for debate on this issue on the penultimate day of the parliamentary session. I had hoped that today we might come and find some new government statement, some new policy, something that would demonstrate the government's desire to strengthen the union between our countries. Or perhaps that we might take a moment to reflect on what has happened over recent months and years with the debate on Brexit and the effect that that may have had on the strength or otherwise of the union between our countries. But alas, I am disappointed. And I have to say at the very beginning that if there is anyone on the government benches who believes that the Brexit process has done anything to strengthen this union, then they are wildly deluding themselves. Because in the manner of which it is being executed, it has demonstrated a lack of will to engage with other countries in these islands as equal partners, and also the fact of its execution means that it challenges the central tenet on which the union is based, and that is that the people of Scotland will be better able to make their way in this world by hitching their fortunes to those of their large neighbour to the south. That is now in question like never before. I want to focus, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the debate between those who propose a self-governing independent Scotland and those who suggest that it should remain part of the Union with Britain. And I want to look at the role that devolution plays in that argument, because it's not straightforward. There are many unionists who say that devolution is a means of strengthening the union, and there are others who see it as a thin end of the wedge. There are many people who believe in independence, who embrace devolution as a step in a process. There are others who see it as a distraction from arguing for independence. And in fact, it hasn't always been just one party or one part of the political spectrum that have advocated these changes. In 1853, an organisation called the National Association for the Vindication of Scottish Rights was established, explicitly to argue for administrative devolution within the Union. And despite its name, this association was launched and comprised of Conservative members of the House of Lords and in academia. It had a small existence, only 3 years, but the ideas that it raised led directly to the Liberal government of 1885 introducing the role of the Secretary of State for Scotland and establishing the Scottish Office. So that was a process of administrative devolution that wasn't proposed by anyone who in my party or who would have supported those views at the time. If I can cut now to the 1920s and a man called John McCormick, who is a very interesting character in this story. McCormick starts life in the Labour Party. He then goes on to be probably what we could regard as the architect of bringing together various groups to form what becomes the Scottish National Party in 1934, and he serves for 8 years as its National Secretary. And then after 1942, he goes on not once, not twice, but 3 times to stand for election to this place as a Liberal candidate at general elections. But McCormick's greatest contribution to this whole debate was to raise the Scottish Covenant, which proclaimed for the first time ever that there should be an elected assembly in Scotland within the Union. Now, that covenant, signed in 1949 in the General Church of Scotland and the Mound in Edinburgh, that had attracted in excess of 2 million signatures amongst a population of 5 million people. But McCormick found that he had nobody that would present this position to the Parliament, and in fact it was left to the Unionist Party, when its members in the House of Lords, to raise the debate about the Covenant and to call for a Royal Commission to look at the question of devolution within the Union. I'm not making this up, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is what really happened. And the amazing thing about the 1950s is the disconnect between those sentiments amongst the population, 2 million people signing the Covenant, and the opinions of the Scottish representatives in this place. In fact, in 1955, at that election, only one MP out of 71, Joe Grimmond for Orkney and Shetland, in any way supported devolution or Home Rule. Every other Member of Parliament was implacably opposed to it. So there was this massive disconnect between what the people wanted and what their representatives were actually saying. Happy to give way.
Member for giving way on the comment about a massive disconnect between what the people want and what the representatives are speaking about. Because you'll know in Scotland we had a democratic referendum in 2014 when the vast majority of people rejected their separatist agenda, yet the SNP in Holyrood and here continue to speak about what we were told would be a once-in-a-generation event.
Well, if the honourable gentleman had beared with me, I'm coming to that. I was in 1955 just there, but let me jump now to the 1960s, because in the 1960s things change, and two things come together. The honourable gentleman might want to listen and learn. The first is that this country, Great Britain, begins a process of rapid decolonisation. It is a new world. And suddenly, rather than the idea, the notion of an independent Scotland being something that looks backward romantically to history, it actually becomes something which can embrace what is happening in the contemporary here and now, the emergence of new nation-states throughout the world. But the second thing that happens is that those who argue for Scottish independence understand and focus on the need to achieve electoral change at the ballot box. And the thing that kicks off a period of half a century of change is Winnie Ewan's election in November 1967. Now, then we have a process of half a century of dissent being manifest electorally at the ballot box, and the state responding to that at every step of the way. In response to 1967, the Kilbrandon Report gets established. It takes forever to come up with its proposals, but it does in 1973 and suggests elected assemblies for Wales and for Scotland. Then we have the election in 1974 of 11 SNP MPs, which terrifies the then incoming Labour government and brings forward... I'm happy to give way to the honourable gentleman, but I may be getting to his point in a minute. But please go ahead.
Well, he's a fine speaker in this chamber, but I'm not quite so sure he can read my mind, but maybe he can. Those 11 SNP MPs elected in 1974 voted with the Conservatives in 1979 to bring in 18 years of Conservative government that decimated Scotland. Will he get on to that point?
I was coming exactly to that point as it happens. Because we then have the Labour government, the Wilson-Callaghan government, introducing it. It takes them 4 years for some unknown reason to get to the Scotland Act of 1978, and we then have the referendum of 1979 in which people in Scotland vote to set up a Scottish Parliament. But that is frustrated because of an amendment to the legislation from a Labour Member of Parliament which requires 40% of the total electorate to vote in favour, otherwise the question will not be put. The Labour administration, in the midst of economic chaos in the spring of 1979, had the opportunity to go ahead and legislate with the will of the Scottish people expressed at the ballot box, but it declined to do so. And that was why, given that it was on its last legs, the SNP MPs decided to withhold confidence from that. You know, in retrospect, I tell you, I would have done exactly the same thing. They did not vote to usher in 18 years of silence. Well, I fear I need to crack on. So, thank you very much. So we have this, as the honourable gentleman has said. In 1979, we then get the introduction of the Thatcher government, and we begin a process actually of polarisation and of nothing happening in this constitutional debate. But meanwhile, people are preparing and people are organising and people are advocating the cause of Scottish self-government. And we had the establishment and the declaration of the Claim of Right in 1989, which I note from our debate 2 or 3 weeks ago in this chamber, every party to this place now supports. So that's encouraging. They didn't, of course, at the time. And then we have the situation where the Labour Party essentially adopts the process of devolution, whereas before it had been a controversial matter. Now it is what John Smith calls the settled will of the Scottish people, and Labour pledges to bring in devolution if elected. So then we have the process of devolution. We have the Scotland referendum in 1997, the Scotland Act the year after, and the reconvening of the Scottish Parliament in 1999. Now, there will be some people in this debate who will wonder why that wasn't enough. They will think, well, that was game over. We've done what we came here to do. Why are people still complaining? Why now, 20 years later, are people still complaining that this is not enough? Well, two things happened after the creation of the Scottish Parliament. The first thing is that actually it worked quite well, and people in Scotland began to appreciate that their local representatives having control over matters made a difference. New things were put into play. Despite the opposition of the Conservative Party for the creation of the institution, it was embraced by the Scottish electorate to a much greater extent than this place ever has been. But the second thing that happened, of course, was the Blair government and its increasing unpopularity. And whereas in England and most of the rest of Britain, the electorate, the traditional Labour electorate, had nowhere to go in response to Tony Blair's decision to remove the Labour Party from supporting them. In Scotland, they had a ready-made alternative, and they began in numbers to join the alternative party on the left, the Scottish National Party. So we had a situation where, by 2007, the first SNP Scottish Government is elected. What is the response to that? We have the Calman Commission and the promise of further powers. We go on in 2011 to see a majority SNP government and it having the opportunity to put before the electorate its central promise, that of giving people the opportunity to decide on their own future. I will talk about the referendum a little bit, but I don't want to go in detail. But I want to simply say that the result, of course, the result of the referendum was the Smith Commission and the promise of further powers. So all the way along over the last 50 years, we have seen additional powers given to Scotland, more control given to the Scottish people over their own lives, because of the state's reaction to the rise of sentiment for self-government and for national self-determination. That is the facts of the matter. That is anybody's analysis of history. So, the Scottish referendum in 2014, much as the gentleman opposite may dislike this fact, I'm afraid didn't settle anything at all. And many people, when they look at this from afar, they misunderstand some of the things that were happening in that referendum. In particular, many commentators on the Liberal left in England completely get it wrong when they say that what was going on was some sort of assertion of identity. That was not the case at all. If ever a country had a surfeit of symbols of identity, it would be Scotland. Scotland has all the identity in the world. What it doesn't have is empowerment of the people who live there to control their own lives. And that was the spirit of the 2012-2014 referendum campaign. Are you wishing to intervene? Yes. Yep.
John Johnson very kindly gives way for me to take the opportunity to remind him of the result of the September 2014 referendum, whereby by a substantial majority the people of Scotland chose to remain part of the United Kingdom family that we're all so proud to belong to.
As well, I mean, the result was 45-55. And of course, when the referendum campaign started, when the referendum campaign started, the split in the question had been about 75-25. So the truth is that during a period of a 2-year campaign, 750,000 people decided to vote for Scotland to become an independent country who didn't feel that way when the campaign started. That was really quite a remarkable achievement. Now, after the referendum campaign, people suggest that the colleagues like here on my side, the SNP, that we don't accept the result of the 2014 referendum. I said in my maiden speech, and I will say it here again today, I do respect the result of the 2014 referendum. The people of Scotland decided to remain in the United Kingdom at that time. But as I said in my speech in the Claim of Right debate, sovereignty isn't just for the 18th of September 2014. Sovereignty, if you believe in it, the claim of right, if we believe in it, has to be for all time. So in a democracy, people have the right to change their minds. I will.
I'm very grateful. Like him, I accept the referendum result, but isn't the point that the minority has rights too? And the union can only survive if those who believe in it are really going to make the argument for it as long as they want it to live. Doesn't it ill become those same people to then scream in the face of yes voters, "You lost, get back in your box"?
It does indeed. But also, I think democracy must allow people to exercise their right to revisit a decision if the options that were presented to them beforehand substantially change. Well, no, I won't, because I'm not. That really couldn't have been a controversial point. OK, I'll give way on that point.
The honourable gentleman for giving way on that point, because then would he say his leader in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, was wrong to stand in front of a poster that said, ahead of the referendum, one opportunity?
No, and I sort of, Madam Deputy, I wish I hadn't given way now, because of course the honourable gentleman wasn't wanting to make a point on the point that I was making at all. Let me simply say this, that when, and it was very rarely that this was said actually, but when Alex Salmond or Nicola Sturgeon referred to the once-in-a-generation thing, they were not doing that as a promise or a qualification. They were doing that. They were doing that in order to remind those who were campaigning for this opportunity that they may only get one opportunity in order to do that. But the truth of the matter, gentlemen, I will allow you to intervene if you wish to, but please let me at least. Well, no, you've had to say. The truth of the matter is that if you change the proposition, then people have the right to revisit the decision, do they not? I would have thought that is a reasonable situation. If you buy something in a shop and it promises one thing, you get it home, you open the box and it isn't what was promised, you can take your goods back. Well, we also should be able to get our goods back. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to go on for a lot longer, but I know you don't wish me to. So I want to try and come back to where I started and to talk about the relationship of Brexit and the debate we're having here on this question of the Union and its strength or otherwise, and of Scottish self-government. The truth is that what has been happening over the last period has been to substantially weaken the Union, because it weakens the devolution settlement that arguably could have given it some strength 20 years ago. And this is happening in three ways. The first is that for the first time in our history, the government is determined to ignore the Sewell Convention and to legislate for matters that relate to the devolved Scottish Parliament without obtaining their consent. That is a regrettable fact, but there's no point the honourable gentleman trying to deny it. The second thing is that if powers are brought back from Brussels, one would expect that they would go to Holyrood, but what Holyrood is being given is a list of responsibilities, not powers, and at the same time it is being told that it will only be able to exercise executive authority in those areas if it does so as part of a United Kingdom framework through a series of joint arrangements. And it has been made quite clear by UK ministers that these joint arrangements will bring together representatives of the 4 countries within the United Kingdom. But the question arises, who will speak for England in that discussion? And because of the asymmetrical devolution that we've had, because of the refusal of successive governments in this place to properly address democratic regional government in England, the only body that can speak for England is this place. So therefore, Westminster departments will advocate the cause of English farmers or English fishermen or whatever in these joint arrangements. The problem arises, of course, in the event of a dispute. They will also sit as judge and jury on what happens. And that makes the farmers and the fishermen of Scotland, of Wales and of Northern Ireland too, subservient to those who operate in the majority of the country. And that is driving a coach and horses through the spirit and the actuality of the Union settlement. So these are dark days ahead, Madam Deputy Speaker. We don't know where the Chequers Agreement now is. We don't know what relationship we will have with the European Union and what the status of the common European Union rulebook will be and what bearing that will have. But we do know that time is running out to sort these things, and we do know that in the midst of the chaos that this government has created, the people of Scotland have an alternative. They have a choice. They can decide to become a self-governing country, to take back control of their own affairs and get rid of the mess that is being created as part of the United Kingdom. And I'm out of time.
Jack Preston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it is indeed a pleasure to follow the member for Edinburgh East. I don't agree with all his conclusions, but I enjoyed his speech. It was a passionate tour de force. I will speak from a text, so I'll be sharper and a bit more focused, I think. So, I am very pleased we're having this debate. It can be quite tempting for the media who report on Parliament to assume that nothing important happens in the final days before the House rises. But the question on how best to strengthen the Union is absolutely the kind of debate it is useful to have at this point in the parliamentary year. But indeed, worrying about the state of the Union is a perennial occupation of British politics. It was not a new idea in 1601 when we had the Union of the Crowns, and it has to be remembered that that was achieved by the King of Scotland.